You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conant, and today we're going to talk AI and data and where the breakdown is happening currently and how quickly it's changing. And got connected with a really cool company, but also a really cool person, Joe Luchs over at Datalinx. And we had a conversation, a few now, and I was just blown away about how he's stitching together kind of that disparity between what's happening with data and then what all the different AI tools that brands are looking to use. But we'll get into that as a whole. But Joe, I'll kick it over to you. I'd love to hear like background and then you, the company, what you guys are building a little bit. We can kind of get into the conversation of how we bridge that gap between enterprise level businesses and AI.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for hosting me. So Joe Luchs, I've been in the data, MarTech, and ad tech space for quite a while now. I've been lucky enough to work across a range of startups as well as large companies. Prior to founding Datalinx, I was at Amazon for many years, bridging the AWS and Amazon ads divisions. And then again, at several startups prior to that. As I was at Amazon and I was leading several AI initiatives, it became very, very clear that, our world is changing fast, probably faster than it's ever changed. For folks that are actually utilizing AI tools, you can see the power of them, whether it's writing code, writing essays, just doing deep research, those sorts of things. The challenge that we ran into fairly consistently, though, is that the data that was actually going into these AI engines was often messy. And then, bad inputs leads to bad outputs. And so all these organizations are trying to figure out, how do I, buy the right AI Ferrari and then take a joyride that just gives me these unbelievable business opportunities? But then they'd show up to the gas station and they'd be told, oh, yeah, you got to drill into the ground, extract the oil, refine the oil, put it into the pump, and then you can put it into your AI Ferrari. Most business leaders, though, they just want to be able to use these AI tools effectively. And so we saw this big opportunity to actually fix the data fuel lines going into these various AI tools. And just as a very brief example, one of my co-founders was leading data and AI at a very large enterprise. And they were able to implement this AI personalization engine that really enhanced customer experiences and made them billions of dollars in incremental revenue. The challenge they ran into, though, is that it took them about 3 months to actually implement their AI model. But it took them over 3 years and hundreds of personnel to actually prep the data going into it. And so we looked at that ratio and we said, okay, this is very indicative of a problem that we know well. Data readiness is an issue. And so sure enough, we are in a very meta sense using AI to prep data to go into the latest and greatest AI models and applications. So that's what Datalinx is. And I'm excited to share whatever you want to know.
Yeah, I want to just dive in because what I hear all the time on both sides, brands as a whole are like, hey, I want to use AI. I need to use it. I'm being asked to use it on a daily basis. And I'm saying AI outside of just like a chat GPT, where it's helping me craft copy or something like that, or an image generator, something simple, and going into like these tools or a personalization tool. And they will literally see a demo of the coolest AI out there with a brand, and they'll say, I want that. And the crazy thing is when they get in and they take a look at it, that AI tool works so well with that brand because that brand was in partnership with the AI tool to do a case study. And what in all reality, what happened is that AI tool trained on that brand over and over again. Yes. And then integrated, right, over the course of 3 to 6 months, just to get that thing to work so well. And AI companies, they don't want to repeat that with every single customer because that upfront cost is so much. And it's that breakdown on they're going to the brand saying, get your data in order, but no brand has I don't know, data integrity. I shouldn't say no brand, but
It's
data
uncommon.
integrity is far and few between with brands as a whole.
Yeah, it's very uncommon. And part of the reason is just it's hard. I mean, some of it's org structure, some of it's the resources and readiness. Some of it is candidly just the fact that data prep work is incredibly, it's just not fun. It's not fun to label data, restructure data. I frequently refer to data links as a very sexy solution to a very unsexy problem. And I think a lot of the frustration organizations face is you hire these data science and data engineering resources, but then you deploy 80% of their time on data prep rather than actual AI and model development. So when you're trying to actually go and create more personalized experiences for your customers, be able to get really smart about pricing and offers, generate new creative that is going to resonate more effectively, whatever it may be, across marketing, advertising, customer experience, business intelligence, there's really kind of valuable and high leverage outputs that you're looking for, but your team is spending 80% of their time on data prep. There's a lot of reasons why it's super challenging. We've done hundreds of customer interviews at this point to really understand the core of data readiness challenges. And there are some very consistent themes, but all of those themes are things that are not easily solved with today's resourcing models. We built our solution very specifically to be able to look at what are the resources that an organization has today, what are the limitations they have today, and then how do we solve those problems in an automated fashion that's also very secure? That's where we're really, I think, resonating with the early customers that we're engaged with, is that they see this as an opportunity to move faster, accelerate their AI adoption, get better outputs with almost zero risk, because we actually deploy our software within their cloud environment. So there's no data movement or copying out. Not to mention things like RAG frameworks, MCP server integrations, these things that allow them to actually put guardrails around the AI. That's all a part of our solution. And that really simplifies their deployment of AI if they build on top of Datalinx.
I mean, right now, the data cleanup in my mind, I want to dig into a couple of things there. And one of them is going to be the security piece, but the other one is just the organizational pieces. Even if you're spending $100 million on data cleanup, the result of a clean, structured data may still not integrate with the AI tools. You will then have to readjust it over and over again for every single tool, which I don't think is anybody wants, because in that case, when you bring up security, I mean, the CIOs, CTOs, they don't want 150 new tools. That's one of the biggest things they complain about, is everybody in the company is plugging in a new tool to the network. I get the security issues are huge, but you embed in there, and then is the idea. So let's tackle that, right? Like the security piece. So you're in their cloud, so they control all access points and everything. You're not an external data layer that's doing API calls, pulling it in, organizing it, and then potentially can have all these different AI tools that plug into a standardized data structure. You're sitting inside.
That's right. And a lot of the legacy solutions, they ask their customer to copy all of their data or send all their data to some new environment. And
nope. Sorry. If I'm enterprise level, nope.
I mean, it's so funny because at this point, right? Because hybrid cloud architecture is just as an example. So Datalinx has a hybrid cloud architecture where we have a control plane and we have a data plane, right? And the customer's data remains in this data plane, right? And then our control plane is able to interact with that data plane in a way that's entirely secure, but still allows our LLMs and our AI agents and our agentic system to be highly functional in their environment. So it's super, super secure. Now, the thing is that obviously that didn't always used to be the case, right? Some of these technologies simply weren't available, right? If we think back to the on-prem days, you often had to be like shipping files. there's still a lot of legacy organizations where they're using SFTPs. You look at things like that, and it's like, wow, we like have the opportunities that are available today are remarkable, but it's also hard to unplug a legacy system. And if you're used to some specific kind of form, function, whatever it may be, it takes time and resources to transition out of that. We're trying to make that process super, super easy. Now, with that said, though, even with us deploying the solution locally, going back to what you just mentioned about all these different tools that you might want to plug in, there's still challenges there as well. Because you can imagine, say you want to send your data to 4 different marketing automation solutions. You want to be able to send your data to 10, advertising platforms that you partner with. You want to be able to integrate into your call center in the cloud so you can do proper customer support routing. All of those types of use cases require you to have some sort of data hook, but also a level of data protection. Part of how we simplify this is we know exactly what format the data needs to be in to actually be effective in those destinations. But in addition to that, we also know, okay, if you're sending data to advertising channels, that those records need to be hashed, right? The personal data in those records needs to be hashed. In addition to that, right, you need to make sure there's a consent stream so you can make sure you're compliant with GDPR, CCPA, and other privacy regulations. So there's a combination of taking kind of the latest and greatest hybrid cloud architecture best practices, combine that with deep domain expertise and actually understanding what format does the data need to be in to be effective in these channels, and then also add in these various guardrails, RAG, MCP, enterprise agents that are customized towards the enterprise that know, hey, do this, don't do that. Those sorts of kind of guardrails combined with the other factors can put us in a position right now where you just have a higher level of security than you've ever really had in the past. And you can really automate a lot of the compliance components.
If I'm an AI tool, right? If I'm any of these platforms that are out there, I mean, I'm loving what you're doing. End of story, right? Because if you can help, if you can help organize it for multiple companies, right, then I have essentially one integration. And if you can help me secure the client data, know what's coming over, because that's a lot of times what happens, right, is the wrong hookup happens, the wrong data gets shared or whatever. And if you can actually add a layer of security, man, if I'm an AI tool, like, I'm investing in you. That's what I'm doing, Joe. I'm throwing money at you to get this done. That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of, it's well said, because there's a certain need for speed at this point, borrowing the name of one of my favorite video games from back in the day. But if you want to be effective in this AI era, you have to move fast. But it's terrifying, right? When you get up to 200 miles an hour on the racetrack, like, you are feeling G-forces that are really intense. And you need to have a very high level of precision, protection, and understanding to be able to get up to those levels of speeds and be able to, frankly, smoke your competition. So it's a combination of and our mission, right, is how can we accelerate our customers' success with AI by giving them the right data fuel? And if I'm going to be perfectly honest, my observation has been, the models themselves are fairly flexible and they're amazing, right? The developments and the speed at which these models are improving is incredible. But the models themselves are flexible. Most of the feature engineering is actually happening within the data at this point. And so that means if you get your data right and you have the right fuel lines in, which is obviously our focus, that allows us to accelerate these customers in a big way. But we're also making sure, use a bowling analogy, we're putting bumpers on this whole process. And by managing things like consent, managing things like data hashing, having a very clear understanding of what data can and cannot go into, say, a Amazon ads or a Google ads API. It just creates these layers of protection that allow somebody to very, very confidently get to warp speed without necessarily worrying that things are going to go off the rails.
Yeah, I think this data issue that I think that you're solving for right now is the number one issue, or is the number one reason we haven't seen all these AI tools take off yet. And everybody's like, I mean, I talk to 20 to 30 brands a week, and everybody's asking, hey, what's the next best tool? What is AI? What have you seen popping up there? And the tools are few and far between that are actually working at scale. And I mean that working at scale, not on an individual basis, but again, like we were talking around earlier, it's like every single tool has to be trained for every single new customer they're bringing on, and they work phenomenally. But if they had a standardized set of data that they were working with at every customer they went to, oh, there would be a rapid adoption across the board, and we would see a lot more advancement. But this, what's holding it back, right? Because you mentioned it, garbage in, garbage out, right? It's AI is a prediction engine. And if you put awesome data in, you're going to get an awesome prediction out. And if you put messed up data in, just slightly off, and you let it iterate over and over again, right? That it might be good for a week, a month, a year before it goes totally off the rails.
And that's one of like the best and worst things about AI is that AI is incredibly creative. Like you see these outputs that AI tools come up with, it is remarkable. It's so interesting, and you see the power. The challenge is though is that AI tools can also exercise some level of creative license if you don't. Well, the term is constitutional AI, but if you don't put some guardrails in place around these AI tools, they will leverage their creativity. And you may have seen the anecdote about the Chevy chatbot that agreed to sell a Chevy Tahoe for $1 on a dealer's website. That was kind of a very clear example of some individual who's it's very funny. Like it's a funny anecdote, and they didn't actually follow through on demanding the $1 Chevy Tahoe, but they were able to manipulate the LLM into agreeing to it and saying that it was legally binding that they sell them a $1 Chevy Tahoe. Now, if you have the right frameworks around your data to say this is the lowest MSRP and this is the highest MSRP, we'll sell a Chevy Tahoe for, and you integrate those data points and those controls in, then you could end up having this I mean, you could sell, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of cars through a chatbot. And that chatbot, again, with the appropriate constitutional AI, will make sure that it's all within a range that folks are comfortable with. Now, we're not quite at the point, right, where people are willing to buy cars from robots. I think, for the most part, people, with the exception of maybe Tesla, I think people still like to do a test drive. They still like to kind of see the car live, those sorts of things. But, if you extrapolate that to other instances, there's so many worlds in which you could take care of so many components of service, support, transactions, and so forth with a really smart AI agent. It just requires good data going into it.
Yeah, I mean, getting through though, I think that we had to get to a point where people are comfortable with it, especially, I would say, because I came from the pharma industry, regulatory affairs people, and the legal team, right? Like the corporate fun killers, right? That's everybody could be having a lot more fun. Legal team was not sitting back saying, no, you can't do that. But again, they're in business because the legal team putting in the protections. But I see a lot of cases, that next step of allowing AI to interact with people is on the legal side. Like they just don't believe what's being built internally or the internal people have what it takes to make sure that those guardrails you're talking about are in place. They have that the outside entity to come in, and anybody who's been in corporate America knows this. Like everybody internally, you can say whatever you want, and they will ignore it. But if you bring in, a BCG or whoever, they say the exact same thing, everybody agrees, right? And so,
yeah. Which I will say, our conversations with systems integrators and consultancies have been really positive as well, because they see this problem firsthand. And in many cases, they've had to go in and manually solve it. And what's interesting is that you know, services organizations, I think, are getting increasingly keen on how they can build automation layers into how they actually do executions for customers. So, BCG, McKinsey, Bain, they go in and they do all sorts of, digital transformation, digital modernization exercises. The core of those projects typically ends up being, okay, how do you get your data ready? Followed by how do you actually, hire the right people and have the right kind of staffing and education. But the core of it is data readiness. And then if you look at some of the folks that are more involved in implementation, the Accentures, the Slaloms, the Deloittes, the Artifacts, those types of companies, they're often having to go in and deploy their own resources to manually prep up this data. And it ends up being kind of a consistent conversation where it's just, okay, how do we on a consistent and regular basis make sure that we can access new data sets, we can integrate new data sets, and we can feed those new data sets into all of these different tools and engines that we need to get to. And it's just incredibly challenging. It is a constant labor that doesn't need to be, or at least that's our perspective at DataLinx.
Yeah, I mean, if you then implement a solution like DataLinx, if I'm on the brand side, it doesn't even have to be a brand side. It doesn't have to be a brand per se, like a purchase good at all. It could be literally any company. I have a new vendor coming in, a new AI tool I hear about, and I love it. I now don't have to expend my internal resources per se. I'm saying, okay, love it, would love to try it out. Integrate with DataLinx or whoever, right? Do the integration with them. They have our data. They're the security checkpoint. They've got everything lined up. And then that integration can take place there and not hit my staff, right? That's one of the biggest things is IT teams are not getting bigger, right? They're cost center. They're usually getting smaller on an annual basis.
Yeah. And well, I guess on the first point, I'll just give an example. Again, my co-founder, one instance he had was they were able to actually add kind of new functions and features to their personalization model in less than a week once they got their data right. So if they needed to integrate a new product they were trying to sell, if they updated their pricing algorithm or mechanisms, things like that. They were able to integrate that in less than a week just because they had figured out the right kind of data infrastructure, data pipelines, and so forth. Again, it took them many, many years and hundreds of personnel to get there. But once they actually had that up and running, they were able to automate away a lot of the components of that kind of agility that they were looking for. Now, there's still a ton of work, still a ton of personnel associated with that. But to your second point, my argument would be, why maintain hundreds of staff focused on data prep when you could deploy that staff towards model development, application development? There's so much work to do at a lot of these large enterprises, and tech resources are often, a scarcity. And so, I kind of compare it to like data janitors. It would be like I was talking to our friend Todd the other day, and I mentioned, well, what if you just wanted to go play basketball, but you had to spend 80% of the time cleaning the court, and you could only actually play 20% of the time? You probably wouldn't like basketball very much. In fact, you'd probably be like, this is just an absurd usage of my time, and this entire practice is just ridiculous. But that's kind of what I feel like when I talk to like data scientists and data engineers. They don't want to be doing data prep work they need to understand the data. That's important for them. And that's part of why we build a lot of observability into DataLinx. But the reality is like, it's a, am I allowed to cuss on the podcast?
Sure.
It's a shitty job. It's a shitty job doing data prep. And so if you could have those folks doing high leverage work rather than commoditized work, that allows your organization to operate much more functionally. And from what I observe, whether it was my time at AWS or the organizations prior to that, or the conversations I'm having now, a lot of organizations don't necessarily want to downsize their IT staff. They just want to get more juice out of them. And I think one of the highest leverage ways to do that is just repurpose those folks from data prep to actual model application and more types of development work.
I mean, if you could do that, they would be totally invigorated, right? Like, let's go.
Yeah.
The reality. Are there
our
go
friend,
ahead.
I'll just say our friend Will used the good phrase. I like this. He said minutes on mission. And if you think about, how do you maximize your minutes on mission? And then how do you think about how do you actually really motivate your workforce? The percentage of minutes they have on mission where they can see the impact they're having on their organization, that's how you actually drive morale. That's how you drive discretionary allocation of time. Most folks, like, they could probably work 40 hours a week and get away with it. But at the same time, like, if they're actually able to, be spending their time on high leverage, high impact work that they know is driving the business, they'll give you 60 hours a week. They'll give you 80 hours a week. They will really, really lean into it. So if you can maximize minutes on mission, you're doing a good job as a leader of an organization.
That's awesome. Are there like key things that brands you're dealing with a lot of people? You said you did a ton of interviews. Like, what are the key things brands need to be thinking about, like, right now for the future of AI? I mean, obviously, we talked a lot about data. Are there other things?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that immediately comes to mind for me is that we've gone from a period in which personalization was a luxury or an advancement. Now consumers expect hyper-personalization. It's there's a classic example, right, of I bought a product on a website, but then you're still showing me ads for it. Why are you still showing me ads? Not only is that annoying for me because I've already purchased it, but the brand themselves is also wasting money. If you think about kind of what are the types of offers you might want to receive from a brand that you're engaged with, even just like, in the various advertising experiences you have, how do you make sure those things are super relevant? Well, again, consumers have come to a point where they just expect great personalization. Now, that requires kind of a series of things working together. It requires really strong data intelligence. It requires good kind of creative messaging and offer generation engines that are built on that data. So you can, again, kind of deliver the right message and the right imagery to a consumer in a point of relevance for them. And so understanding that, not only is a brand not leading the conversation as they may have in the past, the brand is just a part of a conversation. But in addition to that, brands creating personalized experiences for their customers is just a game changer for them. That's the kind of thing that I think brands really need to embrace, is that this old world of like, let's target women 18 to 49 with all the same message and all the same creative. That world is dead. And if you're still operating in that fashion, that's not going to work out very well for your business. Getting to that level of granularity, getting to that level of personalization, actually starting to use the technology to treat people like an individual, like, that is a very real opportunity today. It's not easy. I don't want to pretend like it's easy. But if you can get to that level of personalization that customers expect, you'll build really, really great brand relationships with them. And they'll be loyal. You'll be able to predict whether or not they're going to make a purchase or whether they're going to churn. And you can continue to grow your business in a pretty meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean, wasn't that the promise of the CDPs back in the day, where you could get to this ultra hyper personalized single view of the customer? And this is no knock on them. What they ran into was just the data issue. It's just like, yes, we have this super high powered tool that can do everything to hyper personalize everything you're doing. If you could just give us the right data. Like,
yeah. I mean, and I think there's a lot of amazing CDPs out there. There's some really great platforms that I worked very, very closely with. We built the first DMP at Blue Kai, right? Like, we built the predecessor to the CDPs. But I've worked with a ton of these CDPs. It's amazing technology. It's really talented people, and they've got the right mission in mind. But then you think about how they're architected. Okay, so you have to move or copy your data into the CDP's cloud environment to be able to use it. There's some composable CDPs now, folks like High Touch as an example, who allow you to leave their data in place. But a lot of the CDPs still require you to do data movement. A lot of folks don't love that. That requires also a ton of prep work, right? So part of our inspiration here is I saw so many CDP projects where, some brand bought a CDP and they were so excited to use it. And then it took them, one example is it took them 2 years to build their first audience in a CDP, because despite the fact that they had signed the contract, they had licensed the CDP, they didn't realize on the marketing side that their data was a mess over in the IT. So 2 years later, they finally built their first audience, and my jaw dropped when I heard that, because they paid for the license the whole 2 years. Brutal. And so despite the fact that CDPs, again, I think have the right mission, getting the data ready to go into a CDP is really challenging. And then I think a lot of CDPs are shifting their operations to be much more dynamic in how they build, deliver audiences, how they actually surface insights. But they also struggle with the fact that a lot of them were built, 10 years ago, right? And so a lot of their infrastructure might be less flexible than it might be today. And so CDPs, I think, are in kind of a point right now where they need to evolve, or they're going to really struggle. If I look at what we're building at Datalinx, a lot of the connectors, as an example, that allowed CDPs to be particularly valuable, those have now become a commodity. And so it's a question of, okay, in this data world, in this kind of unified customer 360 view, how do you continue to deliver value to a brand? And how do you allow that brand to, kind of borrowing the analogy I mentioned before, how do you allow that brand to get to warp speed without necessarily having to put a bunch of boxes, structures, and frameworks around their data?
Yeah, when every one of those you add naturally slows it all down, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, as soon as you tell somebody, "Hey, move or copy the data over to our system, and then we'll go and deliver it to you." Well, what if you need to do a real-time data activation? You can't move the data once into another system, then build the audience there, then move the data again. That's just kind of like a lot of hops, and that'll make it really hard to, again, be super responsive to these various customer experiences.
Yeah. Well, Joe, this has been an absolutely awesome conversation. For those of you listening in, I would check out DatalinxAI. Is that correct, Joe?
DatalinxAI. That's right.
Yeah, check it out. Fundamentally changing, I think, how AI and brands are going to interact together as a whole. With that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Digital Deep Dive. Thanks, everybody, for listening in. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Aaron.